it comes to the history of aviation, women were a part of it since its early inception. Such was seen in the Soviet Union, with the rapid industrialization and socialist dialect encouraging women to be part of the workforce rather than just be wives at home. And nowhere else was this personified than with Soviet pilot Marina Raskova, when at the age of 21 she would learn how to fly. By 1933, she began teaching at the Sikorsky Air Academy near Moscow, later going on to break numerous flight records. By the end of the decade, numerous flying clubs were created, which opened up the opportunity for women to become either airplane mechanics or even pilots themselves, whether they joined because of the chance to leave the factory or their home life to help out the progressive workers' paradise, or if they were inspired to be just like Raskova herself. But we must turn to the infamous day of June 22nd, 1941. Operation Barbarossa, the surprise invasion of the Soviet Union by Germany and its allies, has begun. The Red Air Force was caught on the ground, infantry units with unprepared defenses. The USSR quickly fell into a desperate fight for its survival. As war broke out, thousands of women went to the recruiting centers to enlist. However, they were initially rejected, and then later accepted, but only in various support positions, in communications, medical staff, and crewing anti-air emplacements. But still, many wanted to take the fight to them. Marina was quick to advocate for women to take flight and fight against the Nazi invaders, from reaching out to various officials and authorities within the Defense Ministry to even gaining a personal audience with Stalin himself, trying to convince them all that women combat aviation regiments should be created. Her request was granted, and on October 8, 1941, these combat regiments were formed. This included the 586th Fighter, the 587th Bomber, which Marina would lead, and the topic of our case study, 588th Night Bomber Regiment, led by Yevdokaya Bershanskaya, and made up of primarily women volunteers who were in their late teens and early 20s. They would be trained for the next 8 months in the Engels Aerodrome south of the Volga River. Upon their formation, many women within the regiment faced heavy discrimination despite the egalitarian language in the Soviet Union. They were initially equipped with ill-fitted uniforms designed for men, and even mocked by their fellow comrades. The regiment was also poorly equipped with the outdated plane, the Polikarkov U-2, a two-seated biplane made out of wood and canvas that was highly flammable, slow-moving, and can even be shot down by conventional firearms. Nonetheless, the women of the Night Bomber Regiment would serve their country no matter the cost. They would first see combat on June 12, 1942, and for the rest of the war prove effective against the enemy despite the great danger they faced, completing an average 800 sorties a night, flying low to the ground to avoid being spotted and to get a better hit on their target. When the Germans found out these pilots were women, they nicknamed them the Nachthexen, or the Night Witches. Such a name would be embraced, as these women struck fear in the hearts of their enemies before they even knew what hit them. Throughout the war, the Night Bomber Regiment would advance with the rest of the Red Army west, further repelling the Nazi invaders from Kharkov in Ukraine to Poznan in Poland, and the regiment would even be in at the death, pushing into Germany, and eventually flying sorties over Berlin itself. However, the unit would be disbanded shortly after the war in October of 1945. Nonetheless, the regiment would produce 23 heroes of the Soviet Union, more than any bomber regiment during the Great Patriotic War.
Issues like the beginning of the Industrialization era affected women in many complex ways, and also began a spark to peel their way into participating in war combat. The Industrialization drive created the need for women to continue to work. Unemployment in the early 1920s forced 40% of urban workers by 1937, and new nursing opportunities and other jobs were taken by women. Examples like tough ex-peasant women provided a large part of the unskilled labor force. Both urban and rural women experiences and concerns began sparking from Stalin's idea of a great leap forward. And women's equality was introduced and provided, but there was not enough able men for war. Examples like back in the Bolshevik Revolution, women were used to win over rather than represent their interests, like moral constraints and choices or for the sake of the motherland. Even after gaining all of this, women were still rejected, and some believed women could not share male virtues. One of the primary goals of the Soviet Regiment 588 was to provide additional manpower to the Soviet war effort. As men were being drafted into the military, there was a shortage of available soldiers, which led to the formation of all-female units. Also had a broader agenda of advancing the cause of gender equality. By demonstrating the capabilities of women in combat, the Soviet Union hoped to inspire other countries to follow suit and allow women to serve in combat roles. Additionally, the unit's success helped to break down gender stereotypes and promote the idea that women were just as capable as men in many areas of the life. A couple of other goals that were associated with the beginning of Soviet women in combat and the Night Witches included things like oppressed issues like female employment, birth rates, social services, femininity, and marriage. And while women have always been a big contributor to the economy and other areas within the state, Karl Marx expressed, in quotes, class oppression was that of the female by the male and was caused by the existence of private property, and consequently, real freedom for women was possible through communism. And even going back to the Bolshevik Revolution taking place in World War I, the strive of women to be part of the war was a huge impact, and it liberated women from being removed from a place of inferior position, recognizing their equality with men and promising to provide better economic employment on an equal basis with men.
The most notable effects were in the regional sector. Out of the total 261 women who served as night witches, 26 were awarded with honors, 23 of whom were decorated with the title Hero of the Soviet Union, and 2 went on to receive the title Hero of the Russian Federation. One was also named a Hero of Kazakhstan. Major Yevdokia Burshankaya commanded the regiment and received the prestigious Order of the Suvorov Medal. She is still, to this day, the only woman in history to acquire this medal. After the war, many of the night witches went on to pursue careers in aviation, navigation, and fields of science, technology, engineering, and math, all of which had been entirely dominated by men up until the period following World War II. Their success helped break down gender barriers and encouraged the inclusion of women in areas of society where they had been previously excluded, including politics and leadership roles. One of the primary ways the 588th Regiment made a lasting impact was their changing of the culture of the Soviet military by increasing women's roles in combat. The Soviet Union continued to use female pilots in combat roles after World War II, which led to the eventual ability for women to serve in other branches of the military. This was a policy change that facilitated a more inclusive and diverse military, which then continued to evolve in the post-Soviet era. The success of the Night Witches also helped to promote the advancement of women's rights in the Soviet Union, having had their achievements celebrated by the Soviet government and many male military officers, who both recognized the important, unique role played by women throughout the war effort. This public recognition raised awareness and rallied support for gender equality and was a step in the progression of women's rights. Being one of the first all-female military units in the world, their success challenged the traditionalist gender roles of the Soviet Union and of Eastern Europe. Breaking down some of these gender roadblocks was a critical stride in paving the way for generations of young girls and women to pursue dreams and occupations which did not align with gender stereotypes. Following the end of the war, the Soviet Union saw a significant increase in the number of female mechanics, scientists, and activists. The importance of young women seeing a collaborative female military success story is difficult to overstate. The Night Witches inspired a generation of girls by showing them that women are just as capable as men and are able to be dominant key actors in globally effective efforts. Their legacy did make a significant impact on the social, cultural, and political atmospheres of the Soviet Union and her successor states. While the Night Witches were a crucial facet of the Soviet Union's military and were pivotal to the Allied powers' win over the Axis powers and to the defeat of Nazi Germany, it is difficult to draw any direct lines from their actions to impacts made on international politics. The most significant international political effect is simply the Allied powers' victory, which should not be understated. The women in this regiment flew multiple sorties, often in a single night, targeting strategic military locations with accuracy and bravery under the threat of enemy fire and amidst generally very harsh weather conditions. Without their contributions, which immobilized many Nazi troops, it is highly possible that the Nazis would have made even more significant headway and reaped even more horrific damages than they were able to. Their history has contributed to the historical record of women's involvement in war and militaries, largely due to their regiment commissar Yevdokia Rekovich, who sought out each of the Lost Flyers crash sites to ensure the history of the regiment would be retold with accuracy. While direct impacts on foreign and international politics are hard to identify, the Night Witches did become a famed symbol of women's empowerment across the world and continue to be a prime example of the tenacity and abilities of women. Their legacy has had a profound impact on the social and cultural landscape, particularly in terms of women's empowerment and gender equality.